Hi, I'm Andy Ely, a Senior Funeral Director with G Seller Independent Funeral Directors, and we've been serving bereaved families since 1910. I'm sure you're all well aware there's lots and lots of different misconceptions, myths and taboos around the funeral profession and what goes on behind closed doors. So we've decided to put this series of podcasts together and sort of dispel some of those myths and of course answer any questions. So if you do have any questions, please like, share, subscribe and send the questions to liftingthelid@gseller.co.uk and we will do our absolute best to answer them for you. It genuinely is our family caring for your family. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Joe. How are you, Joe? How are you doing?
Not too bad, Andy. Yep, thank you.
Good. We're going to be talking about an unattended cremation. You know, historically this was called direct cremation. It might be referred to the same thing. Why is that?
Yeah, Competition Markets Authority insists that we now refer to this as an unattended cremation or an unattended funeral. But as you said, it's more commonly known as a direct cremation. Essentially, the simplest way a funeral can be carried out.
Yeah, so we've touched on this before in a previous episode. However, on this we're focusing on that unattended funeral service and what people's perception of it is. So of course, you know, people think that it's fuss-free.
Yep.
You know, it's quick, it's easy, it's cheap.
Yep.
And of course, they don't feel that they need a funeral service to carry on with that grief process.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because, I mean, each person is absolutely entitled to have an opinion as to how they want the funeral to take place. Yeah. And direct cremation has its part in that. But there are things just to consider, aren't there, with regards to having a direct cremation. A part of that is allowing your own family to grieve. Because I know, you know, you sit down with a lot of people, don't you? They just say, "Oh, just put them," we said before, put them in the garden outside, in a bin bag outside. Yeah. So, you know,
cardboard box.
That's it. Yeah, common thing people say. But of course, there's an emotional impact to something like that, where if you don't have a funeral service, you're not allowing perhaps your family to grieve in that way.
So we're seeing a bit of a knock-on effect here, aren't we? So it kind of the unattended cremation piece sort of became popular, certainly throughout the COVID pandemic, wasn't it? It was the only option that we had for in some situations, or a very, very small funeral service with like 6 people being able to attend. But what we're noticing now is that, particularly with our bereavement care, people are coming back to us because they feel it's kind of a bit of a delayed grieving process, I guess. Yeah. They feel that they haven't had a proper funeral service for their loved one. And, you know, there is this, for me, of course, I think there's a real worry that people opting for an unattended funeral now, in the future, it might have a negative effect on them. What do you think? Yeah,
absolutely could do. I think people who have had perhaps a direct cremation, perhaps during COVID. I mean, I know at the time there was a lot of talk about, you know, maybe people having a memorial service at a later date, you know, but, you know, inevitably you sort of grieve in that microcosm as to when someone passes away, and almost inevitably, of course, people didn't necessarily come back to do something like that. And now, consequently, as you said, through our bereavement counsellors, we have that, you know, we're perhaps seeing some of the effects of that. You know, as we said, direct cremations have their place. You know, absolutely right for some people. You know, it's not for me to tell somebody what they should and shouldn't do. But say it's certainly worth just thinking about some of the consequences if you do decide to do it, and discuss it with your family just to make sure that they're happy, you know, with what those consequences are.
I think it's important as well to understand what's usually involved in a direct or unattended cremation. I mean, we, G-Seller, we do things very differently to perhaps other people. So just my advice, I guess, would be do your homework, make sure you know. You know, there's things such as deceased not being conveyed individually, for example, it can be
we know there's companies out there that will advertise, put flyers through doors and advertise, you know, through various means that do things certainly differently to the way that we perceive that perhaps it should be done.
So I think it's quite paramount that the individual is looked after properly. And, you know, in some instances there's no washing, dressing. Cremated remains can quite simply be just posted back to you. I don't know, that doesn't feel quite right.
No, and as you said earlier on, you know, of course people are conveyed in vans, with multiple people all at once. And a part of the thing we pride ourselves on is that we always convey people individually from wherever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes no difference if we're looking at a bespoke service or an unattended. The individual is still looked after in the same way.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
So, like you would with perhaps with due diligence on a more bespoke type of funeral service, it's worth just getting a bit of information. You know, make sure the company that you're dealing with, you trust them. You know, and how they're looking after both yourself, but also, you know, your loved one as well.
So, from our perspective, how we do things, I mean, we can talk about that.
Yep. Yeah.
For hours, no doubt, but we can absolutely guarantee that the level of care that your loved one receives is exactly the same as whether we're looking at a bespoke service or a different type of service. Conveyed individually, as you say. Yep. Cleaned, washed, dressed, laid to rest, sensible coffin, and then we still travel in the hearse, don't we?
Still use hearse, and I think we sort of covered this, didn't we? You know, previous podcasts. But yeah, still use the hearse, exactly the same with any other funeral. Still use full complement of men to go and look after the cremation. You know, it's all done properly, and as you'd expect a funeral director to do this. I had a conversation actually earlier with someone who didn't realise that this sort of happened with people, you know, that companies would come and convey in sort of multiple, you know, people at once, and they had no idea that this is how a direct cremation could be carried out.
I think it's important to say as well that we're local. We use local crematoria. We're not travelling hundreds of miles to a different crematory. You know, it's everything's local,
and therefore, of course, your loved one is looked after in our premises as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And unattended, of course, there's no one there. There's no one to witness it. But from our perspective, hand on heart, I can absolutely tell you, we still conveying on shoulders. Sometimes,
where possible, of course.
Where possible, and also where possible, if we can play a bit of music, we will do. We still bow at the appropriate moment, and we allow those curtains to close at the point of committal, and then we quite simply step away. So it's simple, unattended, but still dignified. And I think that's the important piece.
It is. And I say, you know, repeat it again, but I think the important thing to take from this is due diligence with regards to direct cremation, as you would with anything else you do in life. You know, even if someone doesn't necessarily want a funeral service, I'm sure they're still one we looked after with dignity, you know, in the way that they certainly want to be. So just do a bit of research into it. We certainly look after people exactly the same, irregardless, as we said, whether this is a bespoke service or a direct cremation. You're going to be looked after at GSAL.
In exactly the same way.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Excellent.
Joe, thank you. I think we've covered unattended funerals there. All right, brilliant.
Thank you very much.
So any questions, as always, please do send them to liftingthelid@gseller.co.uk. And of course, like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.